let's begin. Welcome to XYZ Masterclass on Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. I'm Fanny Heinonen from Film Tampere, and I'll be hosting today's masterclass. Film Tampere has organized XYZ Masterclasses together with Los Angeles-based XYZ Films since 2021. We have arranged these easily over 10 times over the past 2 years. This masterclass is the first of the year, and I couldn't be more excited about the title that we decided to discuss in honor of the Finnish Equality Day that we officially celebrated on Sunday, 19th March, according to the birthday of the groundbreaking literature and feminist Minna Canth, who was born in Tampere, Finland in 1844. But of course, equality is something that we should not celebrate once a year, but every day, every year, and everywhere. And that is something that I think we all can agree on. I have the pleasure to introduce today's amazing panelists who will discuss the important questions and themes of equality, diversity, and inclusion in content creation from their professional point of views. Good audience, the panelists are Michelle Garza Cervera, welcome.
Hello.
Houston Costa, talent agent from the UTA, welcome.
Hello.
And the last minute surprise panelist guest, producer Kim Bailey, welcome.
Hello.
And our beloved moderator, Aram Tertzakian from XYZ Films.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you for your time and expertise. This really means a lot for having you here virtually sharing this conversation. This masterclass is funded by the Ministry of Education and Culture via European Next Generation Fund. And this is also part of the National Growth Deal project that is currently in the making in the Finnish ministries. So Finns go www.kasvusopimus.fi and find out more. Thank you to European Union Next Generation Fund and the Ministry of Education and Culture for making this and all the XYZ Masterclasses possible since 2022. A quick note before we start, please keep your cameras and microphones switched off during the masterclass. I think that Zoom automatically does it, but if not, please turn them off. And we will have approximately 15 minutes Q&A section in the end of the masterclass when you can ask the speakers questions or share your thoughts on the masterclass. Thank you so much and enjoy the masterclass. Aram, you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Fanny. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Just by way of introduction for myself, for anyone who is not familiar, I'm a co-founder of XYZ Films, which is an independent studio here in LA. We do a lot of work with Finland, not only with Business Tampere and Business Finland, who we thank for putting on this ongoing series of masterclasses, but also actually on the ground work in the entertainment space in Finland as well. A couple examples are Duel, which we shot in the fall of 2020, starring Aaron Paul and Karen Gillan, which shot in Tampere and went on to premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. We've done a huge chunk of the post and VFX for our Tom Hardy, Forrest Whitaker Netflix film called Havoc with Troll in Tampere as well. And we have one, and I'm hoping 2 films lined up to shoot later this year in Finland. So I'm quite the Finnophile, as some of you know, and we've had nothing but great experiences. So I personally, and the rest of the company, XYZ, takes a lot of pride and honor in being able to participate in these events and hopefully, bring a morsel of knowledge to the audience here to help you guys continue to grow on your journeys to continue making films, or for some of the students out there to get into the industry. With that, I want to take a minute to have each of our panelists introduce themselves, rather than me talk about how great they are. We'll start with Kim and then go to Houston and end with Michelle.
Hi, I'm Kim. I have a production company called Corporate Witchcraft with a partner out of Hong Kong. We prioritize supporting early stage filmmakers, in particular Asian, female, and queer filmmakers. Previously, I worked, or I got my start at Paradigm Talent Agency, and I worked in both the literary and finance departments, as well as a foreign sales company and a Chinese financier. So my background is essentially indie film finance and sales.
All right, everyone. My name is Houston Costa. I'm a talent agent in the motion picture talent group at United Talent Agency. So I work mostly with actors, writers, and filmmakers on the motion picture side of things. And I started my career at William Morris before coming to UTA, and been at UTA for nearly a decade now. And I guess before that, I grew up in small town USA, which I don't know what the equivalent is, and a village, I don't know, equivalent like a village in Finland, but like a very, very towny small town. And somehow I made it to Hollywood, but I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you, Aram. You're muted, Aram.
Yeah, we're going to double down on that in a second on all of your backgrounds and sort of challenges and opportunities that came with breaking into the industry. But before we do that, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I am Michelle Garza Cervera. I am a director and screenwriter from Mexico City. I recently, last year, I premiered my first feature. It's called Huesera, The Bone Woman. That's how they name it in the US. And thanks to XYZ, we got an amazing release both in the US and other countries that are sales agents.
Great. And by the way, for the audience out there, I've been fortunate enough, and XYZ's been fortunate enough to work with all three of our panelists. We've been working with Houston for a long time to try to get great casts in our projects. Michelle is a breakout filmmaker whose film we sold and distributed. And Kim and Corporate Witchcraft, we have one and more to come projects with that we're building out. And it's been a pleasure just dealing with all of you guys. And I'm so happy to see you on screen today. So with that, Houston, I want to go back to the question or the point you made about small town America and getting your start at WME and then eventually UTA. Did you, this is a diverse panel here for various reasons. Did you face any challenges or feel at all like there was roadblocks in your way just based on who you were? Or did you feel like it was pretty seamless and you were able to climb the ladder with a lot of support?
No, 100%. It's like, honestly, it's a miracle that I'm here today. And it's just crazy that would I have thought me growing up that I would be on a Zoom giving advice or being real with like people from Finland? Never. I probably could have I couldn't have even pointed to where Finland was on a map because of the American education system, right? It's just like I grew up in like one of the poorest, smallest crack towns in the USA. And really how you escape is either you go on a evangelist mission or you join the army. And for some reason, I just had this feeling that the world was bigger. And I saw an interview with Brad Pitt that he did with Ellen DeGeneres. And he was like, being gay is okay. What the hell's wrong with America? Why can't we have gay marriage? It was like one of those things that I was like, oh my God. So whatever I'm feeling inside of me there must be something more, right? Like the world must be bigger. And so I applied to colleges and I was able to get in to Pepperdine University. And it just even getting to that point, it's like the education that I had access to was so bad, just the opportunities, there just wasn't any opportunities. And again, anyone that looked like me, they just never left. And so and it's crazy when I look back now, it's like, look back at people I grew up with, some are dead, because of gang violence, drug related stuff, or some just like became homeless or whatever it is. And so I was able to escape, go to college. And because I didn't grow up wealthy at all or any safety net, when I graduated with a degree in film, by the way, I don't know what, I wanted to go to college to be rich. I was like, I don't want to worry about money anymore. But then of course, like I wanted to be a film major. So that, derailed that kind of like idealistic, capitalistic plan that I had. But my first job out of college was at a cherry packing plant, packing cherries, literally like in Stockton, California, which is basically the armpit of California. It's terrible.
Yeah, it really is. Like I can double confirm that.
There you go. Yeah, it's the armpit of California. So I did that and I bopped around and I just remember, being on food stamps, which is like, and just trying to really survive to get, and someone was like, you should apply to these agencies, you should work in a mailroom. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even know what a talent agent was. And I say this to answer your question, is that there's like two levels, right? In terms of opportunity. There's the opportunity, especially as a brown person, queer person, whatever it is, even as a woman, that you know exists, but you don't have access to. And it's really infuriating because you see it, but there's like a barrier. But then there's the opportunities which are more sinister that you just don't even know exist, but they're there. And it's almost like, in a funny way, it's like the secret kind of society that all knows about it, the society of privilege that know about these opportunities that exist, that people that just really mostly are brown, you know, for the most part, because we typically don't have that many relations to Hollywood at all, or connections, you know, like, they're just not even aware of. So I literally don't even know what a talent agent was. Like, it's just something you just don't even know. But of course, I go into the mailroom getting hired, and everyone was like, I wanted to be an agent my entire life. I'm like, how? But there's a common through line. They're all Ivy League. They all are the son of so-and-so and the daughter of so-and-so, whatever it is, right? And so you advance, and I'd say the hardest thing was, you know, the two hardest things in terms of like climbing the ladder. One is just not, I don't think I was ever discriminated against specifically because of the color of my skin. It's not like that, but it's more so like there's an unconscious bias because a lot of these people who are in power here, they want to mentor people that remind them of themselves. And so I remember having to interview for 14 desks before I got hired by a partner at the agency out of the mailroom. And the partner happened to be the only Black partner ever in the history of the entire William Morris agency. His name's Charles King, and he now runs a company called Macro. And it's just like, that's not necessarily a coincidence, right? And the other layer was just the expectation of knowing how rich people live and like knowing what's normal, because you enter a space that is so disconnected from reality. But so it was a road. It was definitely hard. So, and then somehow I made it to UTA.
And somehow you now know where Finland is, and you're talking to a bunch of
Somehow I know where Finland is.
Yeah,
it's near Africa, next to Japan. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Michelle, same question for you as a woman coming up in Mexico. At what point did you realize you wanted to make films? And did you find that it was easier, harder, the same to be able to get your career launched as had you been a man?
Yeah, thank you. Well, for some reason, since I was a teenager, I was very obsessed with watching lots of films and listening to other directors talk. So I always had in mind that it was going to take me a long time. So that's something that I was aware of since I was like 18, that I wanted to be a film director, but I knew I had to be very patient and that it was going to be years and years. And back then I didn't thought much of my gender. I guess I had my mom was very imaginative. Like I never felt very restrained, I guess, at home. Like I grew up, my parents were both furniture builders, and it was a home that it was very full of games, you know, and fun, you know. So I didn't saw like all those restraints that I was, of course, gonna find while growing up. You know, I just realized recently. I mean, it's been a year since we released Huesera, but it's hard to know that I am apparently the second Mexican female director to release a horror film commercially. The first one was Isa Lopez with Tigers Are Not Afraid, and I am the second one. So that really hits hard in the sense that I now see my career. It was many years of working in other jobs that had nothing to do with film, but always like every weekend working for other short films, you know, like I worked everywhere, like as a PA, as an art assistant, everything. It was more than 10 years. It took me a long time because in Mexico, it's hard to get into film school. It took me a hard time. And also, of course, like out of 15 people generation in film schools in Mexico, 3 are women. No, that was like the normal thing since like at least until the last 5 years, you know, like thanks to many movements that had to do with feminism. And then you start seeing, you know, I was always into genre, always into horror, and I was the weird one always, you know, like there was like there's this such strong concepts that had to do with those genres that are apparently only directed by men or led by men. So I had many many, I don't know if I should call them obstacles, but many people around saying like I was trying to follow a path that it's not very common. It was gonna be very hard for me. And of course, that's like what now I realize how I got so many comments saying that, or like so many people I wanted to work with, for example, that they didn't see me as a director, because they didn't have that concept in their minds, of how a director could be, or like a horror director could also be a woman, and I think that the right path to follow is that I understood that I had many other people around me that feel the same way, not only regarding gender, but also regarding race and other minorities around film in Mexico. And I was clever, I guess, to realize that I had to do a strong team out of people that we could have been seen as naive, back then, because most of us, we never had a film before, a long feature at least. And I surrounded myself by them. I most of my people, the creative team behind Huesera is our first feature. And we kind of wanted to prove ourselves that we could do a film in our own way, without following many of the things that we always heard, like, oh, that's not the right way to do it. And we were very rebellious in that sense. And I feel very proud now that the film has been doing so well. Like, I have to say that in Mexico now, in the post-pandemia era, is the Mexican horror film that has been more watched in my country. We have over 100,000 people watching it in cinemas. It's still running now. And
Nice.
we're very proud, I have to say, because it's kind of like we proved ourselves that we could do the things this other way. and now it feels like not only like faithful for me to see what happened with my film, but also like I see so many other film students or like young people now approaching me in Mexico and other Latin American countries that feel that I've gotten so many messages now of like, thank you, like people saying thank you, or like, oh my God, now I feel like I can do it as well. And that's been very, I mean, it gives sense to so many years of working behind this film.
Amazing. Thank you. And that's so cool. That's so cool. I didn't know that information about Tigers Aren't Afraid and this being the second female horror film release. So that's really, really cool. Yeah.
Commercially released, yes. Commercially released
is exactly right. Yeah. So I'm super proud of that too, as someone who was involved in the film. That's great. Kim, talk about your journey and, on one hand, just to give people background, how you got started, irrelevant from the theme of the conversation today, but then also get into, did you ever feel roadblocks as a woman, and any other factors that made things harder for you, and have those things changed over time? Or do you still feel like, there's challenges that come with it and with the kinds of movies you guys are trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely challenges still exist, which is why we still have this film. But I think I experienced a kind of similar entrance to Houston coming from Hong Kong. I didn't know anyone. I had no network. My family was not in the business, had no nepotism handout. And I think in terms of breaking in, it's really about just being a self-starter, knocking on every door, forcing your way in. And I think as a woman in particular, the kinds of spheres that I was interested in, which was more of the business side, and kind of moving my way into those rooms and having seats at those tables, it was always very much oh, you can sit over here to the side potentially, but you're not going to have a seat at the table itself. Or if you're sitting there, people are like, oh, are you with this man? Or are you with this person? Like either as their, assistant, partner, I don't know, not as an individual on my own right. And for me, it was very much about both like knocking down boundaries and then also having very strict boundaries myself as a woman. Like I've always had those within the industry, just because I've always wanted to succeed on my own merit. And I do think that there is a lot of that in terms of, I don't know, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I think finding a way to move through things, keeping my priorities intact, and really advocating for myself was something that I had to learn. And coming from Asia, that is something that is hard to do both as a woman and also in Asian culture. It's not necessarily something that we're told to do, to like speak up for ourselves, demand things, ask for things, you know. I think in terms of advocating for our filmmakers, it's a similar thing. You know, it's finding allies within the industry, like a Houston, like when you're talking about working for Charles King, there's not always someone above you who is similar to you, who's going to reach down and pull you up, you know, who understands like either the story that you want to tell or the filmmaker that you're trying to present. So I think for us, it is, you know, finding allies within the industry who want to support those kinds of stories and support those kinds of filmmakers. And luckily that is changing a bit, you know, that is, you know, as I think that, you know, our generation moves up and other generations move out, you know, hopefully there becomes a bigger community that we can then rely on. And I think it's been a lot about finding that community and building that community for me.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Do you feel, following up with Kim, do you feel, you know, with everything that's happened over the last couple of years with, you know, the Me Too stuff, the Black Lives Matter stuff, I think a lot more awareness as to some of these challenges. Do you feel like that's materially turned into a better opportunity and a better space for you and for Isabel, or do you feel like it's kind of more of the same, but maybe a little bit better?
I think it's a work in progress, right? There's a, you know, the patriarchy is long.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is more of a space for an understanding about creating, there's more vocabulary, you know, creating safe space, having equality, you know, us prioritizing that, you know, both from the top down and bottom up, and that includes above the line and below the line, and making sure that we are prioritizing creating a safe space for our filmmakers and for crew and talent is extremely important for us. And I do think that we have more tools to do that than ever before. However, you know, I think top-down change requires, you know, a long time. So, you know, there are still people that are in positions of power or gatekeepers that maybe are not aligned with, or maybe from an older tradition.
We just don't get it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Like I've still gotten calls from some of those people being like, you'll never work in this town again. Like I've gotten that call from like a dinosaur old straight white man.
If it makes you feel any better, I've gotten it too.
For no reason.
Oh yeah. If it makes you feel any better, I've gotten it too, and more than once.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, excuse me.
I think Houston said it to me a few times.
Save that voicemail, have that, you know. I think he was drunk. Totally unwarranted, just like for no reason. But yeah, I think, you know, change is incremental, unfortunately, but, you know, I think it's, again, like demanding those standards, and there is more space for that now. I think that does exist. There are more initiatives, you know, and I think it's about us really holding the line. Sometimes it's harder that way, you know, sometimes it's more difficult for us to cast, to get financing, to, you know, crew up based on those standards, but, you know, worthwhile to do. I don't know if that answered the question.
It did. Are there, follow-up for all of you guys, are there any communities or initiatives that you guys are involved with specifically?
Are there any communities? Well, I think kind of, yeah.
Okay.
I think, you know, during Black Lives Matter, I think a lot of people came together and there's a lot of initiatives and stuff like that. I'm just going to be very honest. I became really fatigued by it all because I felt like I was being pushed into a lot of like these groups that were forced to educate white people in terms of like what they could be doing better, when in fact, like the group just exists. Like my group are just my friend group. I have a very incredibly diverse group of friends that I hang out with that are queer or Black or Asian or what, everything. Like they're just, it's the work that and it's like the same work that we've been doing. And so there's things that I'm involved with, but I found myself actually kind of extracting myself from a lot of these organizations personally, especially last year's, because there's 2020. And that's when I have definitely a time of self-discovery for a lot of us and self-realization for a lot of us in terms of like it's the first time, especially Americans, have looked at themselves in the mirror and be like, how do we impact the community instead of just thinking about ourselves, right? And how does that, and how that really makes a difference. And so, but with that comes anger and rage, and then you bring that rage into 2021, and we're still in the pandemic, and like this is race, this is bad, and I just found myself always getting angry. And so I actually took a break, stepping back from a lot of the organizations where it just was like a lot of, they're important, but it's just like I can't just live my life being angry because that's not productive. And so where I found a lot of like my community is really just like my friend group and my colleagues, like my closest colleagues all are people of color here. Like we just intend to gravitate towards each other because of that common denominator. And so I wish I can sit here and say I'm part of this board and that board and this board, but I'm not. I'm doing the work on my own. I've been doing the work as I have been doing because I'm doing it from a place of optimism, less from a place of like trying to strike white guilt or exploit that to accomplish a mission.
And we're going to touch on that in a minute in terms of how you're doing that in the workplace, which I have firsthand knowledge of. So we'll get to that. I think it's really impressive, but that's a really great and honest answer. And I think I totally get it. Michelle, Kim, anything to add here?
Well, in my case, I think like I have to say as a film director, as a screenwriter, I do think our work is pretty different from activism, and many of my best friends are in that, and they put their lives and their bodies in risks and in so much struggle that honestly I feel like working in film, I feel very privileged in many senses, and I do have to say that I feel like we do another kind of work. I'm so inspired, and maybe most of the gasoline I take to write and to create films has to do with the work that activists that I admire do, but I don't consider us as fiction makers in the same arena, I guess. And I think it's important for me to know that and to understand that, and for me, of course, there's like a huge work as filmmakers in terms of representation that is more like a communication with all those areas, that are actually doing like the work, I think. And I think like in understanding that responsibility that comes with representation, with that such an important or like a powerful tool that we have as film, I think that's most of like something that I keep on working a lot, and trying to really understand how heavy it is, and that's kind of like what inspired me a lot for Wesera. For example, I do have many friends working in terms of diversity in Mexico, or like women's body rights, like abortion legalization. There's so much of that in my film that to me it was very important to give representation. And I can say that maybe most of my friends are not, my best friends are not even filmmakers. They are in other areas working in these same themes. And I feel like I do connect a lot with them. I hear them a lot, I read them a lot, and then I try to convert that into fiction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does.
Amazing. I love that. I think for our younger filmmakers, we definitely partner with a lot of organizations, because I think, trying to find a way to put a stamp on a new filmmaker, first-time filmmakers project is really helpful. It's like almost like a brand of approval or something. So I think, Women in Film does a great job. Sundance has a collaboration with them. We participated in Inside Out, which is out of Canada and is they have a queer finance forum, which is incredible. And our projects have been through that twice. Breaking Through the Lens, which is a first-time female organization. What else? Outfest. Yeah, there's a few that Hellman Grad supports a number of diversity initiatives. I want to say just finding those different kinds of grants and initiatives for filmmakers. And we also do a mentoring program and an intern program that's specifically Asian. So there's a kind of few.
And to touch on that too, I think one of the things just that's so important is that I've been focused on too is instead of me going to GLAAD and prancing around with Britney Spears, you know what I mean? And doing all of that and like gay rights, you know, it's what I found more impactful is interviewing the next generation to get into UTA. And yesterday I was at Pepperdine talking with the people of color at Pepperdine and those unions there, because I'm just like, where are you? Like, come, right? And I find that work a lot more meaningful to me personally than, because it's different. We do different things. I'm an agent, we have a filmmaker, we have a producer, right? So we're involved in different things. And oftentimes you'll see agents at like events or these functions, you know, and support, but a lot of it's virtue signaling. And what Kim is speaking to, it's like really important. There's like, but those are what I want to spend my time on, is focusing like these organizations that really do want to promote marginalized voices and promote women and female story, whatever it is, and making sure that they are given attention. So,
Yeah, Film Independent is another good one. I mean, most of the festival, the organizations that support festivals, you know, IFP, Tribeca, have a specific, you know, maybe like one program that is diversity specific or culturally specific. So those are good resources as well.
This is great, guys. So agent, filmmaker, producer, all trying to make movies about equality, diversion, inclusivity. How do you go about finding or latching onto or, you know, fighting for these projects? And what do you guys find are the biggest challenges? One off the top of my head is probably that there's still a very homogeneous film community when it comes to actors. And I'm speaking from Hollywood, but that it's really tough to get, unless it's a studio film or a streamer film, for a lot of indie films on a international sales model, it's really tough to get actors and actresses who are not, you know, the same names that you've already seen or the same faces that look just like the same names and faces you've already seen. So would love to hear more about how you go about trying to, whether it's Houston for you package or Kim for you as well, trying to package, or for you, Michelle, just trying to put it together. And, you know, how do you go about it? What is your thinking? Is it active thinking? Is it, I really want to make this project as diverse and inclusive and equal as possible? Is it, oh, you know, I read a script and why couldn't this person be Black, or why couldn't this person be queer, or why couldn't this person be a female instead of a male? And then what kind of challenges you come across when you actually are trying to execute on those goals?
I think for me, it's a lot of those factors. I think we try to, I'm very much like, I want to see myself on screen. And so it's easy for me to read something actually and think like, why can't this be Will Sharp, who I work with? Or why can't this be Greta Lee, who I work with, or something like that, right? Like, yeah. why can't this be Elliot Page, right? But to what you're talking about, the biggest thing is the foreign sales model, I think, is just really awful. I think it's incredibly racist, so archaic and outdated. And I don't know, I think there needs to be a pandemic within the system in order for it to like really it needs to be destroyed, to be honest, and then put back together. Because what happens is that producers their hands are tied to this system, but we all have to feed into it. And so this foreign sales model is basically saying to us talent agents that your client is not valuable because of the color of their skin. They're not gonna say it like that, but it's just very clear when you look at it. Like, there's only maybe one Black actress that has any sort of value, or two Black actresses, or Zendaya and Tessa Thompson, right? Or if we're talking about Black actors or whatever it may be, especially if we're talking about Asian actors, right? It's just, it's bad. Or even Latino actors, right? Oscar Isaac, maybe, right? And just to be frank, Oscar Isaac cut off half his name, you know, to sound more Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah.
Right. And perhaps that helps. And it's just kind of crazy when it's just, to me, I just don't understand, because at the end of the day, when I think of the stuff that really works the most, the movies that we're watching, Everything Everywhere All at Once, like, none of those actors would have greenlit a movie based off this foreign sales model, right? Brendan Fraser would have never greenlit a movie off this foreign sales model because he was outdated, right? And it's like, but these are the people that are winning the Oscars that we're paying attention to, you know, and we're thinking about the most exciting stars, but then all of a sudden it's like, a star that my sister in Henderson, Nevada has never heard of is like at the top of this list. And like, she's not going to the theater to see this person. So that's been the biggest issue, is just this foreign sales driven model, because of the streamers being so algorithm driven, it's like kind of created a less creative environment, it seems, especially domestically in the United States in terms of casting. It's like, if you're a comedy, you can only do comedy. So like the whole Jim Carrey doing Eternal Sunshine, like those are rare examples these days.
Yeah.
People don't want to take, these studios don't want to take that risk, and the producers have to make money, have to sell their films, right? And so that's been the hardest part. But like, yeah, in terms of just casting, stories that I'm driven to, etc., like I typically am drawn to things that are just, and by the way, some of them are stories written by white people or are about white people, but they're provocative and they're saying something different. Like there's a script that I love that follows a white woman's descent into white nationalism, and like how we created this monster, right? And how it's society, it's like an examination of society, and an examination of just the internalized white supremacy and toxic masculinity within women, right? That force them to do that lead a woman into this path. And that's interesting to me. That speaks on a larger picture, right? And so I'm interested in those stories, but I'm talking a lot, but that's my biggest issue or my biggest obstacle.
I'll weigh in on that after the other two panelists answer, because we do foreign sales at XYZ. So I have a unique insight into that as well.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. It's exactly as Houston says. I mean, it's limiting. It's archaic. It's racist. It's, it is also gendered as well. So, and it's just frustrating to talk about human beings in terms of their value, which I do daily, and I feel awful about it. I think in terms of like practical steps forward, knowing that I do have to do that, is trying to find ways around it to be like both and. So for example, there's a project that we have. It's a first-time queer Indian filmmaker. Her name is Talika Singh. The project is a queer story. It's about a witch and a Puritan that fall in love in Puritan times. It's very like satirical and fun. So those leads are going to be young and diverse, but we're going to put in maybe like an anchor or someone in this ensemble who will satisfy the foreign sales checkbox. And then it will allow me to tell my queer story and have these other elements and, try and incorporate both things so we can continue to make films like In Everything Everywhere All at Once, or other films that chip away at the argument that we must have this or else it doesn't work, or it's a risk. Because like Houston says, it's not science, it's subjective. It's clear that authenticity and real stories that people care about do like resonate with audiences, and people care about them when they see them, but it is still a business and there's risk involved. So it's trying to, mitigate that in a way that makes sense to both the investor and then also to the creative. At least that's how
just to jump in real quick and,
go for it.
Michelle, but you just hit on something I want to forget, because also we should talk about solution. So what is the solution? The solution is making sure you're watching and paying attention to diverse content online, making sure you're watching Huesera, right? So filmmakers like Michelle in Mexico can have more opportunity, because the more that people are watching her work, the more it gives these financiers and studios a reason to make more of that work. And so, for example, Pachinko, which is a show that I'm intimately involved with, this is a Korean language epic soap opera in a way, right? And it was so important. I remember talking to this actor like that Ken, he was like, it's just so great to be a part of art. I don't really care if anyone sees it. I'm like, you should care, because if people don't see it, it's going to give Hollywood another reason why they shouldn't make it. And that's the problem within the, and you guys look, and it's like, because this is like behind the curtain, because In the Heights flopped, it bombed. And it gave the studios so many reasons why they shouldn't be casting any Latinos in the lead roles, any discoveries, right? It's like, it set back the Latino agenda in terms of, diversity and inclusion and on the studio level. It just did. We saw it, right? And so I think the solution is making sure that you're paying attention, you're giving it notice. Like everyone's watching Succession, everyone's watching White Lotus, and they're fun. They're great shows. That's not to take away that they're awesome. But if you should watch Andor with Diego Luna as the lead. You should be watching Swarm with Dominique Fishback as like things that kind of that can help us and anything also that's female driven, right? So that we can, again, help Aram and Kim and everyone continue to have ammunition, with the foreign sales with the studios. And so, that's the solution, I would say. Sorry, Michelle, I know.
No, don't worry. I love
Michelle,
it.
before you weigh in, I think that's a great point. I think I'll weigh in at the end about the foreign sales business and, how antiquated and challenging it is. But I also agree strongly with Houston that if more of us globally are tuning into some of these shows, and it's challenging because some of these shows aren't getting made, and there's a lot more shows that are getting made that are, wider and less inclusive and everything else. But the ones that are getting made, I think it's kind of like democracy. Like if you're voting with your dollars and you're voting with your eyes. So if these streamers and studios and foreign distributors see that, a diverse, inclusive show is killing it, then guess what? They're going to want another one. So I think that it's hard to get those out there, but the ones that get out there, we need people watching and supporting and, getting their eyeballs on. But anyway, back to you, Michelle.
Well, I love everything you're saying. I guess I have to say that if I would have follow what big producers and some platforms, well-known platforms, told me when I was developing Wesera, my film would not exist, because it was all against what is supposed to be commercially successful. I picked I have an amazing cast. I can't even believe sometimes that all of them say yes to me, but they're great actors, but they're not maybe the most famous, they're not from the soap operas. They were more from the theater, or Natalia, my lead is her first feature. But the thing is that the formula was that I kept it really, how can I say, I was really following my instinct and my guts. I was really working deeply with my cast and crew, and it's really a film that is based on challenging concepts of what is supposed to be a woman in Mexico City. And that comes a lot with diversity talk, in the sense that we see representation in so many films saying that if you inhabit certain world in Mexico City, it only looks one way. There's only one neighborhood, one type of white people, and actually it's not like that. Growing up in Mexico City, I lived in an outskirts neighborhood that it's a pretty bad neighborhood that no one visits when they come touristing, for example. But then you can also, when you turn 20, you move to a downtown area, and you kind of cross different worlds in one same day. And some of those worlds never cross, And that comes with a story that we saw, that it was giving representation of a way to inhabit a city that we usually wouldn't see in films. And we were really following our guts of saying we have to make a film that really gives representation of how it feels to inhabit this certain world in Mexico City, And that came with building characters that like a palette of different women, for example, that surrounded our main character, and that they had different points of view regarding the same theme. In this case was inhabiting a domestic life, and what does that mean in terms of politics and economic world, how does it change to be married with a white guy living in the downtown area when you grew up in the outskirts with a completely different family, we really wanted to give representation to that. And that came with building a type of story with the kind of actors that usually commercially, most of it, everyone here, the big, the big production companies, I guess, or funds would say no to us. So we had to do the film with very little, and the ones that believed in us, that many of them were doing their first feature as well. But I feel like I was very lucky in that sense, because I didn't have any strong force, any huge authority saying no, and that was what gave such freedom and liberty to Wesera and makes it what it is right now. And what happened, that it was a commercial success. So it kind of taught a lesson both to us and and kind of the film industry, which is why we're also so proud.
Amazing answer. A quick follow-up, Michelle, is you're, as a female filmmaker, your star, Natalia, female, your DOP, female. were those challenges? Was there sort of the hierarchy being like, I don't know, did you ever feel that implicitly or explicitly? Or I mean, it sounds like some of the funding you didn't get for some of those reasons, but did you ever feel it was because you know, key roles and key department heads and the director and the DOP and the star were female? Did you ever get that vibe?
I did. And also in terms of race, I have to say, like, there's a huge problem in Mexico. Like, so many of my actresses, I like, really, they were very happy with their characters, in the sense that they were saying, like, I never get these characters, you know, I always get like the domestic worker character, you know, or like if they are over 40, they don't get sex scenes, or if they're giving representation to a pregnant woman, like there's never sex there, you know, like there's so many concepts there that we were challenging with Huesera that for big producers were not attractive, or were a risk, you know, because they wanted big faces or like well-known actors. So I think that, no, the good thing is that we won the smallest funds, the one that the Mexican Film Institute gives to first features, which allows us to be very experimental and like do what we want. And that's the good thing with like the way of filmmaking in Mexico, is that you can do what you want, like with surrounding with a team that believes in you and believes in the project. But if I would have wanted to be like, you know, like subscribe to a big platform, or if I would have wanted more funds, maybe I wouldn't have not been able to make Huesera, you know. And that's I feel like, and of course it has to do with the team, you know, like we all represented risks to these other big kind of productions, you know. So that's why, okay, if we want to make our own like feature, we have to do it like with maybe smaller funds, but with more and more development, you know. I feel like that was what we had to do. We knew we had to work maybe double or triple, but we did it, you know. And I feel like we really proved ourselves that it was like the right way to do it.
That's great. And I mean, I would say, I'll just weigh in briefly. I know it's your guys' time to talk, but as a foreign sales agent, you know, that's one of the components of XYZ Films. We're constantly struggling with that same dynamic. And I would humbly say that we've been ahead of the curve. You know, going back to 2011, we were the only company who backed an Indonesian martial arts movie called The Raid, starring a Muslim character who is shown praying to Allah in the first 5 minutes of the film. When Sony Pictures Classics released the film, there were all kinds of tweets from, you know, certain people all over America, which were like, I can't support this guy, he's a terrorist, which is exactly not what the movie is. But those were bold choices we made back then that, you know, launched a franchise and Indonesian language faces, brown faces that nobody knew or had ever seen before. And we've tried, you know, the business has changed, and we've tried to walk that line between all the challenges and frankly, you know, racism and a lot of things that you see in foreign territories. And just for the audience, for anyone who doesn't know what foreign sales is, it's selling or pre-selling a movie to different countries all over the world as part of a way to raise financing for the film, or to create revenue for a film that's already in production or made. The easiest way to think about it from like a real estate comparison is you have a package, which is a director's script and actor or actors, and the movie's not made yet. It's sort of like, I don't know if they have this in Finland, but it's sort of like a housing block or a condo building where before it's even built, they get a few people to buy. And by getting people to buy, it proves that there's a market out there and that there's collateral and that the movie has value. That's pre-sales. And then once the movie is made, that's the equivalent of sales, of actually selling the condos or the houses that have already been built based on the traction from the pre-sales that prove the model. So that's a long way of saying it's a really tricky environment out there, because there's a lot of countries, I'm not going to name specifics, but there's a lot of countries that just have no interest in, you know, LGBT stuff. There's a lot of countries that, and when I say have no interest, I mean their government will ban or censor or just flat out deny the movie being released. So we're not talking about the foreign sales company not wanting to sell it. We're talking about, I'll name a few names, China, Middle East, Russia, if and when anybody is ever going to sell to them again. Just having a blanket view of this doesn't pass censorship for us because there's a strong woman in the lead or because somebody's gay or whatever. So those are the kinds of challenges that we see. And we often feel a lot of the frustration from the agents and producers, which I totally relate to as a producer myself. But it's just a very complicated and tricky marketplace. On our end, what we're trying to do is keep a balance of projects. So, for example, Huesera, we took on very early and committed to be the US distributor and international sales agent, even before the film was finished and even before all the accolades. And that was taking a bet on Michelle and also just feeling like we're not going to be the company that is only doing what everyone else is doing. Where the challenges come in are on movies with bigger budgets, movies with, basically, let's call it a take-in type of film, where people expect at a certain level that they have to be able to sell it everywhere and get everybody to watch it and be as non-offensive, in quotes, as possible. And that's where you get the vanilla version and the same 20 names that you have to go through and do the exercise. You're even seeing it on James Bond right now, which is fortunately or unfortunately not a movie we're involved with, but there's been a lot of talk for a long time that Idris Elba is the perfect candidate for it. And the talk in the background is he'll never get it because he's Black, and that they're looking at, Tom Hiddleston or Aaron Taylor Johnson or whoever, which are just different versions of the same guy. So that issue with, racism, sexism, lack of diversity in the foreign marketplace is something that we're continuing on our side to try to work around and attack, because there's some cases where we just have to play ball based on the budget and based on the reality of the marketplace. And then there's some cases like with Sarah and a few other films that we're working on where we're keeping the spirit from day one with what we did with The Raid, which was telling the buyers, trust us. I know you think it's going to be a big problem for you guys, but it's actually going to be a big opportunity. And fortunately, we've had enough success cases that we can continue to do that. So yeah, I totally agree. That's a major, massive challenge that, and by the way, Kim, going back to what you were just saying, there's nothing I hate more than having to ascribe value to individuals and then pass along that information to agents, producers.
Yeah, imagine having to tell the actor.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah. You have no value. Are there worse words in the world than you have no value? So yeah, that's a part of my job, which I really dislike, but we continue to fight the good fight. Houston, I wanted to ask you, because you and I are both talking about, where is my question for you? Yeah. So you and I are both talking about a certain actress right now for a project who is a movie star in the making. Want to hear more about basically your work crossing over superstars or stars from their native territories into the US and global market, and especially when they're female or person of color or any other kind of diverse or inclusive factor. What do you find? For example, I don't know if you want to name the name that we're talking about right now for one of our projects, but she's great. She is not known in a broad way outside of, I believe, Portugal, but she's amazing. And this is partly an inclusivity and diversity question, but it's also a general question, which is, how do you get somebody who maybe doesn't look like everybody else from a different territory? How do you get them on the radar and the map and then actually in roles when a lot of people tell you they have no value? How do you get them to the point where, because you've had a lot of success breaking some of these people into people who have a ton of value. So how do you do that?
So It's a couple things, right? I typically, one, am drawn to women anyways. I just feel like my roster leans very women. I just, I get women. I love women. They're so much fun, but it's just one of those things when I look at my roster, I didn't do it by purpose. I found that the most fearless artists that I work with and I've seen the most fearless performances I've seen have all been by women. And so that's something that I've been drawn to. And I, at the end of the day, I'm just drawn to talent. I am drawn to talent. I'm also drawn to things that are different, right? And so there are people that I've signed. So for example, what we're talking about is Alba Baptista. I signed her off with Portuguese reel. She didn't have any American or any English speaking content or anything like that. But there was something about her, and she reminded me of a very famous Scandinavian actress that I work with. And I just was like, there's something here. And she's going to be one of the biggest stars in the world. I just know it. I say it now, like, ha ha ha, it's delusional, but like, I just know it, right?
How do you will that into existence?
Because she's talented. And there's just one of those things that no matter what, you can just tell there's people, and sometimes they're not the most talented. Actually, I like to think the people I represent are very talented, but sometimes there's just a quality that they have. It is this ubiquitous, nebulous, totally random thing that we can only describe as calling it the X factor. And Michelle, I'm sure you've seen on your side when you would do auditions, or Kim, you've seen on your side, and Aram as well. Like sometimes someone just comes in and they just have it. And when I sat down with her specifically, it just was game over. It was a moment in my mind where I was like, I must sign at all costs. There have been other things like that. For example, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie called Burning by director Lee Chang-dong. He's a Korean master.
If it's the movie poster right next to my staircase. You can't see it here, but yeah, it's one of my top 5 favorite films.
So I saw that. I think it's a masterpiece, and if anyone who's listening hasn't seen it, I highly recommend. It's like makes Gone Girl look like Walmart. It's like a very like it's an incredible feature. But
again, it's called Burning, and it's a Korean film, and it's 100% worth everybody's watch. But
I think it's considered the best Korean film ever made, even more so than Parasite. Anyways, let's talk. The point of me bringing up Burning is that there's an actress, and it was her first acting role. Her name is Jung So-jun. And if you guys have seen Blue Velvet, it kind of was like the Isabella Rossellini moment in Blue Velvet. It's like, who is she? She is dangerous. She is seductive. She is interesting, and she is unpredictable. And that is exciting to me. She barely speaks English. I don't care. I'm going to sign her because she is so talented. And so this is to say, it's like, I kind of am drawn to what I'm drawn to. And in a way, in the conversation, what we're talking about too, I also participate in unconscious bias in a way, right? Because I represent people that look like me. I'm just I'm just drawn to that. I mean, it's so funny when I was analyzing my list, it's like, I have all these white actors, I have all these Black actors, I have all these Asian actors, and a few Latino actors, so it's like, but it's kind of like my ethnic makeup is like kind of reflective in my client list. It's a weird thing, which is also a reason why we need to start promoting more people of color behind the camera, in executive roles, like as agents or whatever it is, because this is how we get more talent involved. Because when I look at some of my white colleagues who have been doing this for 30 years, their client roster is all white. And so this is to say, like, I'm typically drawn to these kind of artists, and especially if they happen to be from international, like, countries or whatever it is, then so be it. But I've been able to have, some success breaking out some of these names, and hopefully can continue to do so. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but
no, it totally does. It totally does. And I think what you said about I think there's a top-down effect of more agents that want to see themselves or a version of themselves depicted on screen are going to gravitate. And I think the older generation is largely white and wants the same thing. And I think it's an unconscious bias. I'm not going to go as far as saying, they're racist or anything like that. I think it's just, they know they also come from a different era where pretty much white actors for the most part were the only way to go. and just continue doing business that way.
But I will say too, Aram, just, especially for those who are from Finland who are actors, it's just, there's no better time, to be seen, right? And we're now at a place where, and I will say mostly for, this is like just real talk, I have found it in my career, it's easier to break women internationally than it is men with accents. Women with accents, for some reason, I don't know what it is. It's also, I think, the fetishization of Hollywood, like there's the exoticism of a woman with an accent. Yeah. That's why you get Marion Cotillard, Lea Seydoux, Renate Reinsve, Golshifteh Farhani, Penelope Cruz, Salma Hayek, like you get
all the people you won't put in our movies.
But then there's like a few men. There's like Javier Bardem, Mads Mikkelsen, Vincent Cassel, maybe Tahar Rahim. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's short.
But to be a woman, from an international woman these days, there seems to be more opportunities than ever. Yeah, I'll stop talking. But
Kim, I want to talk about Clementine. So that was a film you produced. It was Laura Jean Gallagher's feature debut. In the scope and context of this conversation, what were the opportunities and challenges you faced along the way?
I mean, Laura's a first-time filmmaker. It was a queer story. It was semi-autobiographical, but she didn't want to say that at the time, which was a little bit of a challenge as well, because sometimes authenticity, I mean, the argument for authenticity is sometimes one that you can make. I think for that film, it was very much about trying to find allies, trying to find people who would support the story and saw, Laura's value as a filmmaker. Probably similar experience to Michelle, and I'm sure you as well, Aram, breaking first-time filmmakers. It was very much about, finding a way to balance the size of the budget with what you wanted to do and finding people who would support that. And yeah, it was definitely about finding executives that were in alignment with that. So predominantly women, queer executives who understood the content. And we also did like an actual fundraise. We did like a Seed and Spark. This was pre-pandemic, back when that was more common. And yeah, it was very like, bootstrapping indie, figuring out how to get her what she needed to make the film. And yeah, no stars in it at the time. Sydney Sweeney, who's now kind of astronomically huge, but at the time this was pre-Euphoria. And yeah, so we kind of, figured it out that way. So yeah, there was a lot of challenges.
I could imagine. Cool. Well, Michelle, question for you is, I'm just interested personally to know, based on Wasera, based on, you now have representation in Hollywood, what kinds of stories are you looking to tell going forward? Are they similar? Are you looking to do something completely different? And I'm not asking for specific info on a specific project, but more about what kinds of projects are you drawn to? What kind of storyteller do you want to be going forward off the back of the success of Wasera?
Well, it's a good question, because it's you spend so much time in a project, right? Like I was 5 years submerged like in Wasera, and I was already writing a couple more that now I'm about to film the next one by the end of the year. And I do think, like, I see there's so much to tell from, at least from my country, from my city, like the story surrounding me and my creative team, that we dream. And sometimes it's hard to think that it's a little naive to think that you can just stay in your country and do many horror films here, but it's kind of, it is a dream. The thing is that there's a lot of difficulties, and that of course has to do with the kind of budgets and limited resources that we have here. But right now I do have, and maybe it has to do with the fact that I just have one film, but right now I love the possibility of staying here and build horror films from here, because I feel like at least I see genre in such a vast way, and I can see that reflected in Latin American literature. For example, I feel like maybe, to me, like some of the best writers right now working in genre are in Latin America, and many of them are women. And I see they've done so much in literature that I feel thirsty, and I want to like be able to put more of these, you know, within filmmaking in Mexico. And I feel like we're so many filmmakers around here, around these countries wanting to do this, but we still don't have the opportunity. So if I can support that and I can, you know, help others come, I would love to do that. I know that, of course, in certain point, I'm not against going to the US and making a film there. You know, I'm not saying like I just want to stay in that box. But at least for now, I think it's a dream that I want to keep on active, you know, throughout my career, because I just see like we've been able to portray like such a little percentage of what we could do within genre in Mexico, also because it's a genre like fantasy and the supernatural. It's like it's all impregnated in everyday life here, you know, like I was there yesterday in an exercise class, and my teacher was telling me that he went to a cleansing with a shaman. It's like the common talk, you know, like there's so much around here that is inspiring, that I don't know why we have to always like we see filmmakers in Mexico like having success, and there's almost an assumption that the next step is just to go to LA, you know, to go to Hollywood, and that happens a lot. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying like, oh, can we maybe get resources to stay here and do our thing and don't have to always go to English? Like, why? Like I see that in some of the best filmmaking worlds in different countries like Korea, as you were talking about Burning. So we dream, of course, as filmmakers in Latin America as well, to be able to do that, you know, to get bigger budgets and more risky projects here. So at least for now, that's the path that I'm trying to follow.
I love that. Just don't do Avengers 15 when you come to LA. Last question for the group before we open it up for the audience Q&A. What advice would you give to someone from an underrepresented group just starting out in their careers? And, you know, our audience is largely Finnish here, but, you know, how do you guys, I'll start with Houston because you're in the representation business, but, you know, if somebody, whether they're a filmmaker or actor, actress, or writer, or any other thing, what advice would you give if they feel like they're marginalized, if they feel like they're coming from a group that's not the majority, how to address that and attack that, and then how to get over the hump and get something done?
I think it's really just leaning on your community, right? And I think kind of what Michelle was saying too, it's like when you just focus on what the market wants, you're going to go crazy. You're going to go crazy because you're not going to make your work, right? You might as well just do what inspires you and follow that path. And I think oftentimes you can find the most support within the communities that you're in, and having a strong sense of identity helps with that, right? So if you are a woman, if you are Black, if you are Latino, if you are Asian, it's just like there are communities, there are filmmakers like that, and it's so interesting when I go to these events like the Pachinko after party, right? Like after the premiere, we go to the after party. And here I am with one of my actresses who happens to be Korean American. She knows everyone. They all came up, the filmmakers, the producers, the writers, they know everyone. And same thing when you go, it's like, it's just, the community is so strong. And had they not been there for themselves, you know, I think it would have been a much longer road. And I think, so I think for anyone who's coming up, it's like finding your community is really, really important. And it takes a village kind of thing for everyone, right? I can't really think of an artist that's so singular that just literally wrote a script themselves, got it made themselves without the help of other people, right? And you just, once you find that community around you and finding someone that believes in you, you know, and that's another thing too, is I always suggest to filmmakers and really filmmakers and writers that are coming up too, and producers, it's like, embrace people who are passionate about you, because when people follow, it's like that quote in La La Land, people follow people who are passionate, right? And that's why so many bad things get made, because so many people with bad taste are like, this is the best way. No one reads anything. They just want to follow someone that has the most conviction.
Yeah.
And so I think for you, it's like, if for anyone that has passion about you, like embrace it. And if you have conviction in yourself, people will follow it as well. If you're your own personal Joan of Arc.
Great.
Love that. That was amazing, Houston. Totally agree.
Very well said. Very well articulated.
I'm like following.
Kim, your thoughts?
I mean, I was literally going to say the same thing, community. I think Houston hit on a good point. Like that community can be your peers. I think a lot of times people are always looking to someone above them. And sometimes there isn't someone who is above you. That being said, when I was starting out, like when I was still in college, I literally was like hitting people up on LinkedIn. Like I was like, I want to meet with you. Can I have a general meeting? Can I like do this? I would go to a panel. I would talk to every single, I was like that annoying person. And that's how I got every single one of my internships, you know, got a foot in the door. In fact, kind people at the panel that I snuck into, who I was sitting next to, he was like, you should talk to that person. You know what I mean? It's like, you're actually put yourself into the community, whether that's, you know, now that we're, you know, things are opening up in Finland, going to a film festival, going to anything in person, or it's like now we have more online resources as well. And that could be just on Instagram, you know, finding other groups that are similar to you. It's like I follow all of the Asian groups, all of the female groups, you know, getting onto things and finding your peers, whether that's on an Instagram live feed and messaging other people. I mean, don't be like creepy, but like, you know, you can be, you can put it out there, you know, and see what comes back to you, you know, and really proactive. You have to be that way.
Well, and I just was thinking too, in terms of like how Aram and I knew each other, how Aram and I even met each other in this crazy industry was because of the simple fact of I reached out to these filmmakers who were making ultra low budget movies. I saw a movie that was made for like $200,000 called The Endless in a theater. And I just loved it. And I reached out to them and I was like, what do you guys have? They're like, oh my God, attention. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like
Houston Costa.
Yeah, it was a bet.
You know, well, not even like I think it was like a coordinator. Like I was so early on in my career at this point, like no one knew who I was, but like I was so passionate about what I saw, and I knew that they had a vision. I reached out and they gave me the script. Like, this has been sitting on a shelf. It's called Synchronic. I don't like, our agent said it will never get made, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a black lead, it's blah, blah, this, like all these other things. And I just like, this is such a special script. And I just willed that motherfucker into existence, you know, internally here, like getting it to Anthony Mackie, getting it to Jamie Dornan, and then their producers are XYZ Films. And then I think it was, you guys were at dinner and they're like, who is this guy, right? But if it wasn't for Morgan and Benson really just being like, sure, you're young, whatever, but like, just please, you know, they accepted the help and they accepted passion. You know, I don't think that film would not have gotten made. I honestly can say with confidence, had I not had reached, that just would not have gotten, because they weren't even thinking about it. And now they're shooting The Moon Knight and shooting Loki, and you know, it's crazy. But it's I think when you have so much passion for something, like people will pay attention and follow, whether it's someone reaching out to you with passion or you yourself.
I will add, just to blow up Houston's spot a little bit, the duel, which I think most of the Finnish audience knows, doesn't happen the way it did without Houston's support. That was another one where he was a big fan of Riley, the filmmaker, and Karen Gillan and Aaron Paul, who are the two leads in the film, are both UTA, and Houston fought very hard for both of them to be in the film. So he's right. For everybody out there, just reached out to us randomly. We didn't even know who he was, about Endless. And then next thing you know, he's our go-to. We call him first on every project to figure out how to package it and how to get creative.
I have a lot of special things with XYZ Films. Okay. All
right, cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Let's get into any audience Q&A.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It has been like wonderful conversation. You are definitely on top of your game. Like, I'm super, super happy and super delighted. And yeah, for the audience, please just press the raise hand button. So I will see that you have a question. Okay, do we have here a question? Yes, we do have. Okay, Sylvie, I will allow you to talk. Please shoot your question. Sylvie, you're muted. Just unmute.
Oh, that's my mom. Oh boy.
Well, I'm more excited
Amazing.
about it. Please.
Mom, go ahead if you have a question.
Yeah, just unmute yourself. Okay. I think this is cute. Like, Aram, seriously.
Let's just keep this profile pic up for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I think meanwhile, because we have a queue, meanwhile, Sylvie, you figure out the techniques. I will let Isabella ask a question. So please, Sylvie, hold your thought. Okay, Isabella, please ask your question.
Yeah, go ahead, Isabella.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So my question kind of, I don't know if you talked about this at the very beginning because I missed it, but so I recently made a documentary that was focused on women in film and kind of why we use the term female filmmaker rather than filmmaker. And I was talking to a lot of directors and creators that make videos and films, and the general consensus was that they use the term female filmmaker, but often that they didn't necessarily want to have to use it, or that it was often kind of thrust upon them. So I kind of wanted to see what you guys thought of, like, how do you feel about using labels for artists, or does it kind of actually benefit to use, you know, female filmmaker, Black filmmaker, LGBTQ, etc., like any of these kind of other labeling than just filmmaker, considering that like the traditional viewpoint has been this kind of cis white man. So kind of, do you see that there is a benefit to it rather?
I think she went on mute towards the end there, but I think we got enough context to be able to answer the question. I'll start with the panelists and I'll weigh in at the end.
I feel like I use it dependent on who I'm talking to. And I think that does, it's a tricky one because you don't necessarily want to pigeonhole yourself, but at the same time, there are a lot of initiatives and virtue signaling going on today. And I am not above using every single tactic to get a project or filmmaker seen or move forward. So if it is helpful, then, or I think it will be, I will use it. I don't know if that's.
Yeah. Well, I totally know what you're saying. And I think there's two things. I think there's a limit, right? I think it's important to have labels in a way, or it's important to distinguish, because at the end of the day, like when we're trying to hire a filmmaker for a project, we can be quote unquote, which is now a racist term, colorblind, right? Mm-hmm. And be totally agnostic, but that's not okay, because you know, there's perspective that each community brings on this planet, right? The Black community, the Latino community, women, men, it's just different perspectives. And so we sometimes need to make sure we're being very specific when we're making decisions and when we're hiring people or whatever it may be. But where you're also touching on where it becomes problematic is, you know, for Charles King, who I worked for, he was the top earner at William Morris. He represented Oprah, Tyler Perry, Ryan Coogler, all these things. He was one of the most successful agents in the history of that company, right? But to him, he would only ever be the most successful Black agent, right? Not the most successful agent, right? And that does weigh on you. It's like this kind of like this little like glass ceiling that you hit that's like, no matter what your accomplishments are, you are the most successful Black author, or you're the most successful female. What about the most successful author, right? Or the most, so I know what you're speaking to, and it is something that comes up, but I do think that we cannot forget, we need to make sure that we acknowledge our differences, you know, in a way that's respectful, and in a way that, like, especially in the context of storytelling, that is correct, you know, that it will help, that is right for the story that's being told. And what I would say too, because this was another question come up, and I'll stop talking again, is there was a question that was like, well, what is it like, who is allowed to tell which stories, right? And that's like something that comes up a lot. So can a can a straight person tell a gay story? Can a gay person tell a straight story? Can a white person tell a black story? Vice versa, right? Me personally, it just depends on what the story is, first and foremost, and it depends on like what your intention is. Moonlight, one of the best movies ever made, or one of the best films in the 21st century, was directed by a straight man, right? Black Klansman was written by 2 white guys. Last Black Man in San Francisco was written and directed by a white filmmaker. But what is your intention, right? And who are you casting? And why are you casting? And those things come, are really important. And I think, especially as it relates to the casting side, it's like when you're talking about something that deals with like internalized homophobia and just like like stories where it deals with all of that, like you would probably want to cast a gay actor for that. Like, have you at least tried, right? Or when you're casting a trans actress for something to play something that is just a trans, like shouldn't we look at those actors first, right? But in terms of storytelling, I kind of point to Tar, like when you get into the narcissism of small differences, it leads to the most boring kind of art and conformity, right? And it's just, and I think that we all have to be cognizant and understanding why we're telling the story. So if you're a white person that wants to tell a story about slavery and a slave getting abused, why? Like, why are you telling that story unless there is something, there's a reason? And so it all comes down to the intention for me. And anyways, but Michelle, I'm not sure if you have anything to say.
Well, I would just add, as a female filmmaker, I would just love to be a filmmaker, of course. I feel like that's for all of us. But then on the other hand, I do think that there's like it's gonna be uncomfortable until it's not. I feel like it's like all these diversity conversations can feel uncomfortable because we're not in the place where we could say like it's a normal thing to have 50-50 or to have like a diverse film world. I guess it's all around in all disciplines, but I do feel like if it still feels uncomfortable to name, like in the case of my film, like being the second female directed horror film from Mexico, I don't think that should be the only thing that describes my film or myself, but it is a conversation that in the Mexican filmmaking world we have to have, and I hope to get it to that point where it's not a conversation, where it stops being uncomfortable. But I do think that we still have to embrace those uncomfortable numbers, and like it kind of feels incisive until it's not. And so in that term, I think that for some, as Kim was saying, like in certain conversations, I think it's still relevant to mention.
Yeah. Michelle Yeoh won an Oscar.
Go ahead,
Michelle Yeoh won Best Actress, right? But it's also, it would be so ridiculous for anyone to not recognize she's the first Asian woman to
100%.
win an Oscar in leading. So it's like, we have to acknowledge these things to what you're saying. It's relevant because it starts a conversation. Sorry, Kim.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't equity yet, which is kind of a point that I was going to make, which is just the glaring obvious point. And I think when it comes to who gets to tell the story, sure, maybe your perspective is valid as well, all perspectives are valid, but at the same time, the person telling the story who hasn't had a seat at the table, perhaps let them take that seat because they haven't had that seat before. Reserve that seat for the person who doesn't have a seat or hasn't had a seat until everyone has a seat is kind of, the point. So I think, trying to raise up people who haven't had voices, that's part of the point of having those descriptors.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think in a perfect world, I mean, the film industry and TV industry is not much different on this level from the rest of society and the business industry as well, the corporate industry. I think that we all want to get to the day where you can just say filmmaker or actor or actress or whatever, and not have to qualify it with female or Black or gay. I think we're in a correction period right now where a lot of times that's necessary, because if people don't know that, the same way we've been talking about the challenges of it, I think that there's opportunities too with the right kinds of buyers and the right kinds of folks out there. And, I think that we're all fighting for the day where we can just say filmmaker, director, actor, actress, whatever, without any qualifiers. I think that in the short term, it's going to continue to be the case because there's a correction that's happening. And I think it's important to distinguish and qualify, and use it as a badge of honor. You know, it's not like we're not going out there saying, oh, you know, this is a great project, but it's so-and-so, you know, female filmmaker or whatever. We're using those as, hey, this is standout and special. And also you have an opportunity to work with a female filmmaker. So, you know, I think that we're all looking forward to the day where there's enough equity and equality in society where we can just call people people. But I think it's going to be a while, but hopefully not too long. But if history is any indicator, it's probably going to be a while before we can just call people people.
Yeah, thank you. I think you covered it great, and thank you, Isabella, for your great question. Hopefully, it didn't cut too soon. Okay, we have another question from Salla. Salla, please shoot.
Hello, I'm from Finland and I'm an actress, and I live in France and Finland. And my question is about women over 50 years old. I'm a part of a group in France called the Tunnel de la Comédienne de 50 ans. So the tunnel of the actors of 50 years old. And the idea is to work on presence and representation of women over 50 years old. And I'd like to ask you if you have like thoughts of this like invisibility that women are put in after 50, where we don't see women over 50 anymore on our screens. So do you have any opinions or experiences or views about this phenomenon? And of course we have now the Oscars as well have shown us that women over 50 can succeed. So there's a tendency, but it's still like a huge problem in many countries. So I'd like to hear your experiences or ideas about this. Thank you.
100%. I mean, it's a real thing. It's a real issue. You can go through any agency and their like client list by age, and it's like so many women in their 20s, so many, and then like from 40 to 50 and then onward, it's just like it shrinks. And I signed a few years ago Isabella Rossellini, and she just was like, why do you want to represent me? Like, no one wants me. I'm old. And I was like, people want you, right? And now she's like working every single day. She's like so busy. She doesn't know what to do with herself. But like, she was telling me, I had lunch with her just the other day. She was just telling me, she was like, when I hit 40, I got dropped by my agencies. There was no jobs. And so that's why she started like her farm, and she like this big farm that she has, and started doing other things for herself because she couldn't find work. And I know Amy Schumer has like a skit that she did, excuse my French, but it's called The Last Fuckable Year. And it's like her and like Tina Fey and I think Patricia Arquette. And it's like this notion of like the women they hit this age, and then it's like their last year before they are not, you know, fuckable. So it's a conversation in Hollywood. I don't know what the solution is, right? I think the solution is like us propping up someone like Michelle Yeoh, who says that like when anyone says you're past your prime, you know, they're wrong. And like when Helen Mirren won an Oscar, like there's so many examples of some of the best performances and some of the best work that we've seen are from actresses that have more experience, you know, under their belt, and more history and more lived experience. Unfortunately, it's a real thing, right? Because I think, and it is all inherently tied to also the foreign sales model of just like what sells? Young people, young hot people sell, right? That's like always been. It's just been the history of Hollywood, right? And it's what apparently what we are being told are what is driving audiences to the theaters, right? Which I disagree. I have a feeling that's not the case, but that's what we're told.
Yeah,
and so
Mrs. Paris still exists, and people love that movie. You know, I think it's also, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Houston. If you're still going.
No,
I was going to say, I think it also has to do with storytelling as well. And that comes from, you know, filmmakers who are telling stories and putting roles in there for older women, older men, you know, just stories that are not always, like Houston said, the focus. And that also requires, you know, filmmakers having a long career, female filmmakers having a long career, which also isn't always the case. So I
Well,
think
sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Sorry, Kim. Well, yeah, I just wanted to add that, yeah, it's been impressive for me too, like realizing that, like, for example, working with actresses, yeah, over 50, I just worked for a TV episode with one that she's one of the best actresses in Mexico, and she got big after 40, and she's never had, for example, a sex scene in her life, and that's because there's this inherent thing saying that we have kind of expiration date, as Houston was saying, like for that other project, and it's just very impressive, like how like that process all of us as women, right? Like it's like this feeling, this terrible and horrible feeling that we have an expiration moment. And I think it's really an important talk going on right now, and I see it in some recent films that I love. And actually, my next film, our lead is a 17-year-old woman, and so I think I think at least for me, even like for other fellow filmmakers, it's a discussion right now to understand that how terrible that representation has been going on. So I feel like I'm feeling hopeful about it. I think it's changing. I see it like also like in the Oscars and many films coming lately.
I'm feeling hopeful too. The one thing I'll add, the caveat I'd add is that a lot of the actresses that we're talking about, Michelle Yeoh, Helen Mirren, Jamie Lee Curtis, these are movie stars from a previous generation who are now making a comeback, so to speak. But it doesn't address the question of how does a up and coming or aspiring actress do it if they weren't Michelle Yeoh 30 years ago, or if they weren't Helen Mirren or Meryl Streep or anybody else 30 years ago, Jamie Lee Curtis. I think that's the really tricky one, and I don't have a clear answer. I think that smarter minds such as Houston are working on that, but yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate question, and that definitely a blind spot in Hollywood for now.
Yeah, but like we have ammunition. I mean, all the Oscar winners are above 50 years old this year, right? In the acting category. And you know, Bill Nye, who I work with, he got his first Oscar nomination after being in the business for 50 years, right? So hopefully people are starting to pay attention. And I think what Kim is saying is that like it's also encouraging creators to make roles for these people, you know, for people who are, you know, who are still in their prime, but not given those opportunities. So I have to log off though.
Yeah, I was going to say on that note, I think we got to close it out. Thank you to the panelists for being so generous with your time and wisdom. And we really appreciate all of you. And again, thank you, Fanny and Film Tampere and Business Tampere and everybody else involved in these masterclasses. They're super useful and informative for us. And I hope it's the same for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would have loved to ask like many questions, but we're running out of time. So thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Aram. Thank you all who participated. And something that I forgot to mention in the beginning is that this masterclass was recorded, and you will get this recording to your emails just in a couple of days. But thank you. Take care, and let's remember these wise thoughts we just shared. Thank you. Take care.
Kiitos.
Bye, everyone.
Kiitos.
Bye. Thank you.